Some of the Salaf, they said, whoever remains silent is saved. I am completely against not just the LGBTQ agenda and the so-called rights that they have tried to allocate to themselves, but I'm against secularism. That's what I'm constantly talking about. I'm against all of the, I'm against feminism. I'm against all of the modern ideologies that are assaulting us as Muslims and our youth. Once this whole thing is over, I think a lot of people are going to regret being loose with their tongues and with their fingers.
والقرآن المجيد بل عجبوا أن جاءهم منذر منهم فقال الكافرون هذا شيء عجيب.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, y'all. Today is another podcast here with the Muslim Cowboy, and you've got with us somebody who I really respect and look up to. I'm really excited to have him here with me in the studio, and it is none other than the recent University of Medina graduate, Imam Tom Faccine. He is somebody who spent a lot of time here in Medina, studied with a lot of the shuyukh and the ulama in the haram, as well as in the Islamic University. He has a lot of perspective on what we call the fiqh al-waqi', right? An understanding of the current realities. And he's somebody who I feel has a very good grasp on the way that things are going in the world. So without further ado, I really want to introduce you guys, for those who haven't seen him yet, Imam Tom Faccine. Tell me if I'm saying that right.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you so much for having me on.
Welcome, bro.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about my last name, it's Italian. So the actual Italian pronunciation is Faccine or Facchini. But when we come to the United States, everything changes, right?
Yeah.
So they add letters, they chop off letters, they change pronunciation. So growing up, people used to pronounce the name Faccine, and even like my father pronounced the name Faccine. But I've tried to reclaim the Italian pronunciation of it, which is it's like zucchini but with an F. Yeah.
So Facchini.
Yeah.
MashaAllah. That's pretty cool. Yeah. Same thing with my last name. Used to be Usted, then it became Ustez, then it became Estes. Now it's Estes.
It's Ellis Island Butchery.
So you're not born in Italy, right? You're born in the U.S.
Nope. My family came over in 1905, so quite a while ago. So I was born and raised in New Jersey. And thoroughly kind of American and Americanized. Yeah.
So you're third, fourth generation?
Yeah, it would be. Yes, my great grandfather came. So whatever that makes me. Yeah.
Yeah. My family stole Mexico from the Mexicans. They've been here since 1605.
There you go. Yeah.
Cornelius Smith was his name. So yeah, I've been here too, but we all came from somewhere else. Yep. So, guessing you weren't always born a Muslim, huh? You a lot of people, ask this question to me. I'm sure you get it. I mean, you could pass for maybe like a Bosnian.
Yeah, people in Medina always used to try to guess where you're from, right? And so I'd get Bosnia once in a while. I'd get Morocco. I'd get what was the other place? Syria. Some people would say Syria or Turkey. But yeah, no, that's correct. I was raised a Christian. My father was a Catholic. My mother was a Protestant. And so I kind of grew up familiar with both of those sorts of traditions until I was a teenager, and I kind of rebelled, as American youth often do. And I became an atheist. And then it wasn't until I was in university that I became sort of exposed to Islam and started sort of the long process of investigating it and learning about it.
So growing up, though, were you someone who was this kind of investigative person? Did you read a lot? Were you into cartoons, comics?
Well,
I mean, what was your thing?
That's an interesting question. There was a big watershed moment in my life, and that was 9/11. I was in 8th grade when 9/11 happened, and before 9/11, I was just coasting. I'd get whatever grades that I had to make my parents happy. But mostly what I cared about was sports and video games and friends and stuff like that. I didn't really care about intellectual pursuits. When 9/11 happened, I realized that there was a whole lot of things that I didn't understand, and it kind of politicized me. And that was what really I had my intellectual awakening right then and there. So that's when I started really, really becoming interested in politics, interested in history, started reading stuff outside of class. I was big into Noam Chomsky and Howard Zinn and stuff like that, right, in high school. Anything I could get my hands on. A funny story. I got suspended from school one time, in school suspension, right? Because they figured out that out of school suspension was actually kind of like a reward. So the only time in my life I got suspended, in school suspension, for like, I can't remember how many days it was. It was for something stupid, but I brought this stack of books, huge stack of books with me. And it was like one of the best periods of my life. I was reading, like, I remember Henry David Thoreau, and I read the autobiography of Malcolm X and the autobiography of Gandhi and all this sort of stuff. So it definitely, a fire was lit inside of me. I really wanted to understand the world, and I wanted to understand where we were and what was at stake, and what are the sort of different things that were going on. So that was, then I became really, really serious about it.
That's pretty amazing. I think I was in 8th grade as well. So I guess we're both the same age, huh? 35.
Yeah, 34. Yeah.
So. Okay. Yeah. Wow. That was cool. Yeah. I guess you'd probably call that like when you said an intellectual awakening, also like this moment moving from innocence, right? You're no longer just kind of going with it anymore. Like you're fully awake.
Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah. And that's, a privilege, depending on where you're from. Like some people don't have that luxury, of being sort of asleep. But it was the bubble was burst at that point. And that just sort of a chain reaction of like having to know and having to learn and having to find out. And since then, I've been someone that just has to understand. Like I just always like trying to get to the bottom of things.
That's pretty amazing. So from this point on, where did this lead you academically? Did you end up going to college? Did you what happened after this?
Yeah, that's actually kind of interesting. So, I mean, the other really big thing in my life, I think, in high school was music. I was a musician, and I was a trained musician. I could do everything. I was trained in classical voice. I had a repertoire of songs in different languages. I played in a jazz band and a rock band and all this sort of, like, every sort of instrument you can imagine. I could do something with it. And for money as well. Like I was on my way to becoming kind of like a professionally trained musician. But having this intellectual awakening got me much more interested in history and politics. And so when it came time to apply to colleges, I hedged my bets and I kind of did a 50-50. I had half music schools that I applied to, and the other half were for I thought at that point I wanted to be a history major. And I left it to like the very, very last moment to decide which way I would go. And, everything happens for a reason. You look back on these things years later and you're like, wow, subhanAllah, like how different my life would have been. And I'm so grateful that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided me throughout the paths that he did, because if I hadn't, at the very last minute, I decided to go with history and social sciences and leave the music thing, or at least just let it be just like a hobby. Obviously, this is before Islam. And, I wonder if I had not done that, would I have ever come across Islam? Would I had ever, become a Muslim? Like, Allah knows best. But you look back and you look at the subtle ways that Allah has sort of, intervened in your life, and it's very humbling. So, I decided at the last minute, and I went through auditions and everything, and, did well, got accepted to lots of places. But in the end, my heart wasn't in it, and I felt I needed to understand things better, and I went to college initially as a history major, and then once I did a little bit of coursework, I switched over to political science and political theory.
Wow! And so this was, I guess, you got in 2006, and you graduated.
2007. Yeah. 2007. I graduated high school, and then the fall went to Vassar College in Poughkeepsie, New York. Had other opportunities as well. I got into the University of Chicago, but I kind of got cold feet because it was far away from home. So went just about 3.5 hours north of where I was from. As I said, started out as a history major, did well, but I wasn't satisfied with the history department. The political science department was much more critical and asking a lot more interesting questions. So I switched my majors to political theory and international relations. I was studying, I'd studied a lot of colonialism. Like, honestly, that's a lot of what I studied. And this is kind of what brought me into conversation with the Muslim world in a new way. So I was it was funny because I don't know about you, but when 9/11 happened, like I started develop a sympathy with Muslims as a people, but I had absolutely no sense of what Islam was. Even in high school, I was aware of the Israeli-Palestine sort of, ongoing situation, and I was sympathetic to Muslims. I was sympathetic to Muslims with the Iraq War, and then that just continued right into college. And so a lot of my coursework was studying European colonization of Muslim lands. Yeah, go ahead.
So these events for you, I mean, because this really resonates with me. They didn't make you antagonistic towards Islam, like many people, because many people they were charged, right? They became they had a lot of animosity towards Muslims. For me, I was part of several forums, throughout into the end of college, pro-Palestinian. I don't know if you remember Rachel Corrie. She was an activist.
Yeah,
very famous story, standing up against the bulldozings, right? And she was killed standing in front of one of the bulldozers. And I always imagined myself I was going to be like the Christian guy who goes and saves the Muslims.
Right.
I was going to be the male Rachel Corrie. So I actually was really neutral towards Muslims. I mean, I didn't know anything about Islam, but that's interesting that you put that, because a lot of people think that everybody, became anti-Islam, but some of us, I think we're kind of seeing past it, right? We weren't fooled by the narrative that was going out there.
No, definitely. And I think above all else, and somebody told this to me, way after the fact, and it resonated, like I always cared about justice. I think that's what it was. And that's almost kind of like what Allah put in my heart to kind of save me, because I just wanted to understand like what was right and what was wrong, and to try to do the right thing and whatever it was. And if you care about justice, then you're going to look into things. You're going to investigate. You don't want to jump the gun. You don't want to be hasty. And so, even when it came to, okay, such and such a group is claiming such and such an action, or these other people are saying, well, this is why they're doing it. They hate us for our freedoms, et cetera, et cetera. You're not going to take it at face value. You're going to want to investigate and figure it out and see, is that really true? And anybody who was following politics at that time, they quickly learned that there was a lot more to it going on, right? We saw maybe you could have been forgiven for being sort of like bamboozled with Afghanistan. But by the time 2003 rolled around with Iraq, it was very clear. The goalposts kept on moving. First, it was, weapons of mass destruction, which they never found, and then there were all these sorts of other sort of justifications. And then, Bush and his oil interests. There was, any conscientious person who wasn't like overly ideological about it, it was going to give you pause. It was going to give you like, well, wait a second, like something's going on here, and I don't really understand what it is, but I think that it needs to be investigated. So that's kind of, I guess, what was animating me at the time, and that carried on through college. And during college, at the very end of college, when I was sort of much more familiar with the Muslim world, then the Arab Spring was going on, right? And so here's another sort of situation where you've got, the Western governments that are, supporting puppet regimes and stuff like that. And now the puppet regimes are sort of crumbling. And that's not to say that, there weren't also problematic aspects of it, but, this was something that was like, it was regularly in conversation, right, with what was happening.
So you mentioned something about justice, and I kind of want to touch on that a little bit before, because I love your story. But how important is justice in Islam? Because a lot of people, with their negative assumptions, and a lot of people who watch my channel, because there's actually a pretty good percentage of non-Muslims from the South who watch this, like Copenhagen dipping, goat wrestling. I was kidding. People. And they might think that there's no such thing as justice in Islam. It's that Muslims just do whatever they want. They harm whoever they want, right? Because we believe what we believe. How important is justice in Islam? Are there any verses in the Quran about justice?
Yeah, I mean, justice is paramount. Justice is one of the most important things in Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that be witnesses, stand up for justice, even if it's against your own people, whether it's your father, your brother, or your tribe, or whatever it is. We're committed to justice first and foremost. And other, this is well known, even amongst non-Muslims. They've made this comment about Islam, that Islam is even more about justice than I think Christianity is on some level, because, at least from the New Testament on, Christianity has taken on sort of the the idea of turn the other cheek and sort of, the meek shall inherit the earth and all these sorts of things. And Islam doesn't really have that. It's like we have, eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And if you want to forgive, you can. That's your prerogative, and you'll be rewarded in the afterlife. But you stand up for what's right, and you don't let anybody push you around, and you don't let anybody intimidate you. It doesn't mean we're bullies, and it doesn't mean that we're aggressive and belligerent. No, we're not. These things, they have very strict sort of parameters, and they have guardrails, and you're not supposed to be an offensive or an aggressive person. But we're not going to let anybody push us around either. And justice has to be done at the end of the day. Because Allah is just. We believe that God is just at the end of the day. And God wants justice done in this world. And so if we can be instruments of justice, and that doesn't mean vigilante violence, Islam is against vigilante violence, but when it comes to creating institutions and creating courts and making sure that people get a fair shake, right? That's what it's all about. There's a very, very famous story where one of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, whose name is Ali, when he was the ruler, okay, so he's the big shot, and he sees someone in the marketplace who basically, what happened was, his coat of armor got stolen, and then he finds it in the marketplace being sold, right? So basically being pawned. And so he takes the guy to court, but he doesn't have any evidence, right? And so the court rules against him, even though he's the head of the state, or he's the head of the political entity. And the person who was the defendant was so impressed by this scenario of justice that he became a Muslim right there. He accepted Islam. He said, "This isn't normal. This is not normal. If you go to the United States government, okay, try to put the president on trial. Try to put the head of the CIA or the head of the FBI on trial. You ain't going to win." It's a foregone conclusion because of who that person is. And we have, legal doctrines like political immunity, et cetera, that prevent them from even being tried in the first place. But when it's in Islam, there is no such thing. Everybody is subject to the same law, and nobody's above the law. And at the end of the day, justice has to be done.
MashaAllah. That's really deep. And did you quote from Surah An-Nisa? I think there's a verse 135. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين بالقسط شهداء لله ولو على أنفسكم, right? أو الوالدين أو الأقربين. Am I right?
Yep.
So this was something that really impressed me about like my dad growing up, and he instilled this into me so much that he used to tell me, even if you're going to get in trouble for it, even if you might lose your job, you might do this. He said you got to always tell the truth, no matter what, right? And so I tell him, Dad, you've got a lot of prophetic traits, but you need to take that next step, right? So, and this is something that's really important, because at the beginning, him, like a lot of other people, they were very concerned with me becoming a Muslim, that it was going to harm me, harm my character, harm the quote unquote values. Right? That's one thing that I heard a lot, and I don't know if you heard this from anybody, is that now that you're a Muslim, your values are not the same as ours anymore. Right? We don't have the same values, right? We call the qiyam, right? So not just justice. I mean, is this something that has any weight or bearing, or what are Islamic values and what are Western secular values? In your opinion?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a big topic. And it's interesting, you bring up your father, because I also have a very similar, influence from my father as well. My father has always been someone who cares so much about justice, and whether it's in the workplace or whether it's, with other people, he's fearless. I mean, he doesn't care. He's not going to be silenced by just because somebody's his boss or somebody's like a big shot or something like that. So I guess, I am indebted to him to kind of giving me that sensibility, because that's carried me through and actually carried me to Islam. When it comes to the difference between Islamic values and Western secular values, I mean, well, if we remove the secular, I think there's a lot that's overlapped there, right? If you want to talk about like Christian values, like let's talk first about Christian values and Islamic values. There's a ton of overlap, right? The differences, I think, are very minor, and they only have to do with sort of the details, right? So we talk about mercy. Mercy is a huge value within Islam, and mercy is, we say that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was a mercy to all the worlds, or mercy to the entire universe, right? And even in the situations where you are wronged, if somebody, kills one of your family members, etc., it's a meritorious act to exercise mercy to that person. You're going to see that reward in the afterlife. However, we have, we don't confuse mercy for meekness, right? And we don't confuse mercy for laying down or for being in a submissive state. I think that's sort of a difference that comes in on the details. But when it comes to being, generous, right, to being uplifting people around you, being a contributor, being a team player, right, your respect for authority in general, as long as that authority is righteous. These are things they're fairly universal, to be honest with you. They're fairly universal values, and really the differences only come out in the details. When it comes to secular values, secular Western values, there is a difference there, because the entire idea of secular values is that we don't talk about religion too much, because if we do, we're going to be divisive and we're going to fight, and we don't want to fight. And Islam proved that that's not true when it comes to the world, right? And world history, is that you can be religious and you can be fully religious. And it doesn't mean that it's divisive, and it doesn't mean that you're going to come to blows or get involved in violence. When did Christianity thrive the most? Christianity thrived the most under Islamic rule rather than Christian rule. In Christian rule, they had this thing where it's like you had to be the Christian sect of your Lord or of your prince or of your king. There was no freedom to be a religious minority. Yet at the same time, under Muslim rule in Palestine and Muslim rule in the Middle East or in North Africa, you could be a Christian and you could practice your faith, and you would be taken care of, and you would have rights, etc., rights that you didn't have under either the Holy Roman Empire, quote unquote, or the other sort of religious empires that were around. So, because of the European experience with Christianity, they came up with this arrangement of secularism to say, like, well, let's just not talk about religion in that depth. We're going to just have these sort of secular things that we're going to agree to, and we'll agree to disagree on everything else. Sounded like a good idea at the time, but one of the consequences is that now we've eroded our ability to assess and evaluate what's going on morally, right? So if you look at what's going on in schools with gender ideology, you look at what's going on in schools with sexual ideology, you look at what's going on in America with the proliferation of pornography and the objectification of women and, the erosion of family values and all this stuff. You can't critique it morally in American culture if it's technically legal, right? You don't, people say, oh, well, that's cute. You take care of that at home. Or as somebody told a Muslim parent recently in Montgomery County, Maryland, they said, you can teach around the facts at home or in the mosque. That's what they said. Which is, we're trying to, so this has put us in a situation where at a societal level, we don't have the ability to say this is wrong, that this is immoral, and this should not exist, and that we should actually do something different. So Islam does run counter to that idea. Islam says that no, having a moral dimension and a moral outlook and caring about morals in a structural and a public way is very important. It's essential to society, to family life, to everything that's good and holy and sacred. And it doesn't mean that you force your opinions or your beliefs on other people. And it doesn't mean that you're going to be divisive and come to violence or things like that. But to go to the opposite extreme is even worse, right? To completely subtract religious concerns or spiritual concerns or moral concerns from society, it's a huge mistake, and we're living in the consequences of that mistake.
So, I mean, that's really I've got a lot to unpack there. What I think there's the idea that the Christian West, because I mean in the East I think there is a little bit of a difference now. I mean there's a resurgence, but in the West, would you say they've kind of done the whole relegation? They've relegated your deen, your religion to the bedroom, right? What you do, you practice at home. Don't share it. Kind of like we used to say back when I was growing up. One thing you don't talk about at the business table is religion, politics, and sex, right? I think even PBD, he just mentioned this in his Andrew Tate podcast, right? But now they have changed this to where people in the public sphere are starting to talk about these things, but they're talking about it from their liberal standpoint. Like, we're going to talk about it. You can't talk about it if it's about anything except for, you know, this alphabet community. So we can talk about it now, but we're going to talk about the sex and the politics that we want, and you have to accept it.
Yep.
Whereas before it was, you know, even more relegated. So they've actually not just relegated it to the homes anymore. They brought it out to your face.
Yeah.
And you almost have to accept it, or else, you know, you get ostracized. But I do want to go back a little bit to the time, because we've, you know, mashallah, this is kind of the meat and bones of what we're getting to. But you, at this point, you're not a Muslim yet. When did you become a Muslim? Was this after college or towards the end? And how did it impact your life from a philosophical standpoint? Did you change the way that you were thinking, or did it just refine you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so I mean, it was several different things that kind of converged at one time. You know, I became familiar with not just Muslims, but Islam in college. And long story short, I went on a study abroad semester to Istanbul in Turkey. That was very, very impactful on me. I came back very, very, you know, I don't want to say ready to accept Islam, but I was close. I tried to take a class on Islam at the university I was at, or at the college I was at, and had a horrible experience. It was taught by a non-Muslim. It was taught in a very problematic way. There I go again, being the rebel. I was the rebel in class, and, you know, always arguing with the professor, etc. And, you know, one of the big things, you know, my situation is a little bit atypical maybe these days, because in undergrad, I got married. It was fairly rare. And
that much. It wasn't very common amongst my friends.
It wasn't very common, yeah. So this is, you know, early 20s, and then soon after we were expecting our first child. And with all the things I was kind of thinking about and passing through my head and the experiences that I had, the gravity and realizing that I was about to be a father just kind of kicked me into high gear when it came to, I felt super responsible. And at the end of the day, I just wasn't satisfied with the regime that I had to make myself into a better person. And the best sort of system that I had sort of identified up until that point was Islam. And so at that point, I became serious enough about it. I started praying. I started fasting. I started sort of, you know, formally, I guess, practicing and accepted Islam. The changes that it had, I mean, it's interesting the way that you framed it. I definitely think that it was a refinement. And I had people, you know, sometimes you have to trust other people more than you trust yourself, because when you're in it, it's hard to keep track of everything that's happening. But I had somebody tell me, who actually also converted to Islam years later, but they knew me at the time, and they told me exactly what I mentioned earlier. They said, you know, that kind of makes sense that you converted to Islam. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean it kind of makes sense? They said, well, you always really you cared about doing the right thing, and you always cared about justice. And I was like, wow, well, that's really, you know, kind of you to say, but like exactly you said, it was a refinement of those things. Okay. Because at the end of the day, how many of us care about justice? But if we don't submit ourselves to a regime that's outside of ourselves, that comes from a divine source, you know, we're going to oppress other people. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to have a conflict of interest. We're going to tell ourselves that we're doing the right thing, when in reality, we're just, you know, making decisions based off of convenience and things like that. I felt the need to have something much bigger and much more rigorous than myself that I submitted myself to. And Christianity wasn't cutting it, to be honest. And I even felt that as a young child, as a, you know, a kid of like 10 years old. It's not enough to show up to a church and sing songs and pray once a week or twice a week. It's not enough. Pray 5 times a day. Now that's something, right? Fast 30 days a year. Now that's something, right? That's something that if I want to discipline myself, I want to be able to refuse a bribe. I want to be able to turn away temptation. I want to be able to do these things. Then that's the price. That makes sense as a price to pay.
So the commitments, they weren't a big deal for you when you came into Islam. I know a lot of converts.
Some people are psyched out. I loved them. I thought this was the coolest thing. This is what I wish I had. Even when I was a young child, I was still into Christianity. Wow. I was always attracted to the monks, to the monastery and the monastic tradition, because I was like, That's what real worship looks like. That tells me where your priorities are. That tells me that you're willing to sacrifice. So I loved it. Fasting, I loved it. Praying, I loved it. I mean, it was difficult to get used to it, but I mean, I definitely was committed to the idea of it, and it made sense that it had to be that much.
So for all of those out there who are watching, this might be your first time watching me on my channel, Islam, a lot of people don't translate it, right? They don't understand what Islam actually means in the English language. So they just think Islam, the name, maybe it's the name of some tribe or some Muslim, maybe Muhammad's last name, peace be upon him, was Islam, right? They have these word conceptions. So Islam actually, it means to submit yourself in obedience to the Creator with sincerity. So it has like these conditions around it. Like if it's not sincere, it's not Islam. If it's not wholeheartedly giving yourself, it's not Islam. So it's basically kind of like when you go to the airport, right? And you got to put your hands up, pull everything out of your pockets, right? This submission, but in everything in your heart, where you're giving everything that you have, promising and committing to your Lord that there's only one God worthy of worship. Am I right?
100%.
So this also, what was the hardest thing for you after accepting it to explain to other people? Was there something that people weren't responding well to, or was it just an issue of identity?
Yeah, I mean, people were definitely concerned. I mean, it was, yeah, I mean, what was it, 2010, right? So, I mean, people still remembered 9/11, and they were afraid about, what does this mean? Is it a phase? Are you in a cult? Like this sort of thing. But I knew from even then that it was just a matter of time, that they had to experience me before and after to be able to be reassured that it was just a refinement, that it wasn't, because people are also sensitive to, this thing, which is like, if you were part of their past, they also don't want to feel like you're rejecting your entire past, right? Because they're part of your past. And so they feel rejected. Yeah. And that's why I never even really considered changing my name or anything like that. I mean, my father has the same name. If I was to change my name, it'd be like a slap in my face, a slap in the face to my father. In addition to that, the meaning of the name is fine and everything like that. But so it just took time. It took time for people to understand and be reassured that it's not a phase. It's not a cult. I'm not like, doing anything drastic with my life. It's just a tweak. It's just an adjustment. And then I'm the same person really, but there's certain things I'm not going to do anymore. Right? I'm not going to go out to the bar. I'm not going to play music. I'm not going to, hug your girlfriend or whatever. There's things that I'm drawing lines on my behavior, and there's certain things that I'm not going to come close to anymore.
That's pretty interesting, because I think a lot of people have that idea, and my family said the exact same thing, right? That my mom said, you've made us, non-existent. And I told you, like, what are you talking about? Why would you even suggest that? I almost felt like offended that they would even assume that. Like, well, you have such a low opinion of me that you've known for so many years of how I am, and you're just assuming this because I just made it public what I already had belief in my heart. Because right. For years before this, I didn't believe. For 4 years, I believed that Jesus was not God, right? That he was just a messenger. I just didn't know what to do with it. Yeah. Right. So, but I think what it is that people have, right, a whole packaged notion in their mind about baggage that comes along with being Islam. And they see that as like this existential threat to everything that they're about. Mm-hmm. And what you mentioned about the names, I think, is really important, because I mean, I'm sure you got it a lot. I still get it a lot. I just had a recent run-in. I want to kind of break this down with my hat. I don't know if you saw the video. I took it down from most everywhere just so there's no image problems or anything that would happen. I don't want to make any place look bad. But, what is it about a name? Because people are asking me all the time, even non-Muslims, they're like, can we talk to a Muslim? Because I do dawah a lot on different platforms and chats. I'm like, what do you mean? I am a Muslim. They're like, you can't be. Your name's Brandon. Right. I'm like, what is a Muslim name? So can you tell us, what is a Muslim name? Is there a such thing as a Muslim name? So on and so forth. Did all of the Sahaba, all of them change their names when they converted? Just give us a little bit of background on this.
No, that's an important issue, and a lot of Muslims are confused about that as well, let alone non-Muslims. I mean, the thing is that, again, you hit it on the head when you said, okay, well, what did the companions do? The first generation of Muslims, the people who all of them were converts. Only a very, very, very few of them changed their names. So the default is that you keep your name. That's what your father named you. That's what your family named you. That's your lineage. That's your heritage. And when it comes to culture, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, He said, we separated you into, or we made you into tribes and nations so that you would get to know each other. So that basically means variety is the spice of life when it comes to culture. You're Brandon and I'm Tom and I'm Italian and you're whatever and Mexican, and we have these cultures and we get to learn and benefit from each other. I get to make tiramisu, you get to have tacos, and everybody has a good time, right? The only time that that's not okay is if there's something that actually is insulting to the creator. Okay, so if I have a name that offends the creator or offends his religion, then that needs to change. If my name was like sun worshiper or something like that. And that was the situation of the first Muslims, where if they had names that indicated polytheism or idolatry or something like this, or bad names like, Fatso or, these sorts
Beetle.
of things. Yeah, exactly. Like
there was one that his name was Beetle.
Yeah, exactly. Denigrating names, insulting names. Then they were changed, right? But so there is no, Islamic name. Like Islamic names are the default. The default is it's a Muslim name, and only the exceptions get changed. And so the crazy thing is that my name actually comes from Hebrew originally. Thomas is one of the disciples, one of the followers of Jesus, one of the actual genuine followers of Jesus. And the word exists in Arabic as totem, which means twin. That's also, what Thomas means as well. I did a bunch of research on names and stuff like that. Things I had no idea. But even if it wasn't, I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. And so that's what makes Islam universal, is that Islam is able to adopt and incorporate every single culture on earth. Like you said before, and you put it really well, it's just tweaking it. It's just refining it. It's not coming to change it. If if your culture is Mexican or Ecuadorian or Puerto Rican or Italian or Spanish or whatever, it's not going to replace your culture. You don't have to start wearing robes and turbans and stuff like that. You can be your cultural self, and in your culture, all you have to make is a few adjustments. Alcohol, gone, right? Pork, gone, right? Certain sort of things with gender relations or whatever. These sorts of things are just adjustments. But you get to actually benefit from the best part of your culture, and you get to leave the parts that are actually holding you back.
So this what I'm wearing right now, this is not clothes of the kuffar?
No, and that's, Muslims are way in left field with that issue. And any of the scholarly commentaries that talks about resembling the kuffar with clothing has to do with ma yakhtassu bihim, right? That which is emblematically distinctive of them. So, if you wear, for example, orange robes, okay, and shave your head, you know that you're a Buddhist monk. Everybody in the world knows that you're a Buddhist monk. That's what is being talked about by those hadith. If you put a red dot in your forehead, right, we know that that's a symbol of Hinduism. It has nothing to do with a collared shirt. It's got nothing to do with a cowboy hat. It's got nothing to do with, suspenders or neckties or whatever. All that stuff, or jeans, all this stuff is stuff that is not distinctively identifying one particular non-Muslim group, and so it's permissible.
Okay, awesome. That's really good to know, because a lot of people have these questions, unfortunately, and there's still a lot of ignorance, and I think that's what's, what your purpose is a lot out there, and so many other of us who are on the world stage is we're trying to break these misconceptions in a good way to Muslims and non-Muslim audiences to show them what Islam really is, what it allows for, and how much easier it is than people want to make it out to be.
Yeah.
So, mashallah, like watching you on a lot of these other places on your own platform with the Utica Masjid and on Paul Williams's stream and so on and so forth, you've got a lot of knowledge. And I mentioned that you did go to University of Medina. What did you study there? How many years exactly were you there? How much did you benefit? And tell us some of the people that you actually personally were under at the Haram, so on and so forth.
Yeah, well, to be frank, I don't know very much, and I don't have a lot of knowledge. If you go abroad and you study, you realize how small and insignificant you are. I'm very grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the Creator, that gave me the opportunity to go and benefit to the extent that I did. But at the end of the day, I'm just a beginner, right, when it comes to this stuff. And I try to forward the things that I've learned, and do things that I think that would be in accordance with our sacred teachings. And I make mistakes, just like everybody else. So I was there for 5 years and change. I went through the Arabic program, and then I did the 4-year bachelor's. My bachelor's degree is in the Sharia, right? So, quote unquote Islamic law, though it's not really a good translation. It's in Sharia. And outside of the, I'll just, just to drop a couple names. When I was in the Kuliya, one of my favorite subjects was tafsir. And one of the professors that I benefited the most from was a Jordanian professor called Muthanna Abdul Fattah. I had him for 2 semesters. He was absolutely amazing. And then that carried over to my studies outside of the formal curriculum at the Islamic University of Medina. I was, enamored with tafsir, and I studied with Sheikh Abdullah Shinqiti for 4 years in his halaqah of the Quran. So that was sort of, those are the 2 people that I kind of was closest to. I had a lot of other teachers and professors along the way, but it's not about accumulating names, right? Because you see some people, right? They do their resume padding where they add, if I even just sat in a circle with somebody, right? Like I'm a student of so and so. I hate that stuff, and I'm not going to do that. Who would know me? Like, who would recognize me and know me? If I came back, Sheikh Abdullah would. I was not. I can't put on airs and say that I was the closest of his students, but I was in the front row every class, and he knew me, and I would ask questions after and listen to other people ask questions. I would benefit from other scholars. I would go listen to their Q&As, and I would go, but in a much more remote and anonymous way. So may Allah, forgive me for my shortcomings, and I hope that at the end of the day, it just ends up benefiting myself and the ummah.
I mean, bro, how important is it to get knowledge?
It's essential. If you don't get knowledge, then you're going to destroy yourself, especially if you're involved in online, quote unquote, dawah or whatever you try to do. Because here's the thing. If you don't, if you're not aware of your insignificance and how Allah can replace you, and how subtle a thing riya is, showing off, and how subtle of a thing kibr is, pride, then what's going to happen is there's going to come a day when you think that you're defending Islam, but in reality you're defending your own ego. And that's just facts. And it's a scary time we live in, honestly, with the whole social media thing, all the social media channels. If you're monetized, you've got a certain, the algorithm's pushing you, whether you realize it or not. Whenever you look at some people's channels, and if you try to do something purely beneficial, like teach somebody Arabic or tafsir of Quran or something like that, maybe you'll get 5K views. You put someone in the thumbnail and you drag their name through the mud, you're going to get 100,000 views. If you're monetized, it's extremely difficult to expect that you're going to be able to resist that sort of temptation and not rationalize why it's okay, and you're really defending Islam, and you're spreading dawah and all this sort of thing, standing up for the truth. If you haven't really trained yourself and you haven't sought ilm, right, in some sort of traditional way through some sort of program, you're going to get blown away. It's just what it is, and we all have shortcomings, and we ask Allah to forgive us. And, we really hope that the dawah scene comes together and unites in a fruitful way, in a way that is a genuine unity, not one based off of fear or what other people are going to say, but in a way that's going to be pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's going to demonstrate our sincerity, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَا تَنَابَزُوا بِالْأَلْقَابِ بِئْسَ اسْمُ الْفُسُوقُ بَعْدَ الْإِيمَانِ, right? It says about name calling, right? And unfortunately, we have a problem with name calling with dua and certain social media influencers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, how evil, بِئْسَ اسْمُ الْفُسُوقُ بَعْدَ الْإِيمَانِ, how evil is the word of rebellion after faith. SubhanAllah. We have to actually go out and prove our sincerity, I think, as people who claim to call to Islam. Every single day on social media, we need to actually actively demonstrate our sincerity. And demonstrating our sincerity means taking the means that if you find that someone has slipped up, you're going to maximize the chance that they're going to turn back and repent, and not minimizing and putting barriers and obstacles and disincentivizing that person from coming back to the right way. And Allah knows best. But to answer your question, in a very brief and succinct way, if you don't take care of this, if you start getting involved, or maybe you studied a little bit with somebody on the side here and there, or some like online institute, and you think that you're going to now get involved in this sort of work, either it's going to be lust. I'm going to tell you right now, it's either going to be lust and temptation is going to take you down, or it's going to be your arrogance that's going to take you down. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to expose you at the end of the day.
SubhanAllah. And not just that, but the hereafter too. I mean, because if we know the hadith, one of the first hadith we learned at the Islamic University, right? I'm sure you learned it as well in the Ma'had, in the Arabic Institute, is the 3 people who were thrown into hellfire first.
Yeah.
Right. And dawah fits into that, even though it's a qari, it's a person who it's a reciter of the Quran, someone who gives charity, and a mujahid, someone fights for the sake of Allah. But dawah falls into that. So I really, well, you got me really emotional, because every time I'm reminded of that, even though I'm not monetized, right?
Yeah.
But even still, I get those feelings like I have to check myself. Am I doing this for the sake of Allah? Or am I just trying to catch up with another video that I did? Got a lot of views, and it's a struggle. It's for me, and I'm not even, you said you don't have that much knowledge. I'm nobody, but I've been in Islam for 9 years, and I am trying my best to study. But then we have people who are, brand new Muslims, right? And they're going and making accounts talking about Islam and this and that. And my message is to them to be very careful, because you can get used to the fame, right? And I'm sure you can agree. And then once you're so used to it, then you might put a block for yourself from getting the knowledge that you desperately need. But yeah, you can hurt yourself from really benefiting people as good as you can. So I think that's really great advice. And another thing that really kind of I think you hit on was about people putting barriers when it comes to the whole refutation culture, because I'm not saying people do this for this sake, but if people were to be quote unquote reconciled from the mistakes they're making, if they were to do that, then you wouldn't have any more refutation videos to make. So it's almost like it's kind of like the doctor who wants his patients to stay sick so he can continue making money. If everybody started coming back to what you want them to come to, then you're not going to have anyone to refute. So you almost, I don't know, it could be subconscious, but it's almost like you don't see that desire for islah. It sometimes comes off as the desire just to show that I'm right.
No, definitely. Unity is bad for business.
SubhanAllah, it is. So just for the record, because I know you've only got like a couple minutes left.
Yeah.
What is your stance? Are you pro LGBT? You don't like the Sharia law? You want American constitutional law to reign supreme upon the land? Because there's a lot of things being thrown out there, and I'm personally appalled. But just to clear it up for the record, I want to go over the reality and what Tom stands for, and to clear up some of the statements you've made, because people have said that you're not strong enough. You joined Yaqeen, so therefore you must be, also a deviant, promoting a deviant ideology. And I know you made a video about it. So just in as short a time you can, kind of reiterate to the people why you joined, what your goals are, and what you see for promoting Islam in the West, how you see to better your community around you, and what your stances is on these topics.
Definitely. Well, I'll say that, some of the stuff they said, whoever remains silent is saved, right? And I think once this whole thing is over, I think a lot of people are going to regret being loose with their tongues and with their fingers, because we have to have an ethic of verification, right, in Islam, and an ethic of not reading into things that aren't there in a sort of biased or ideological way. Anybody who follows my stuff, you can look at the stuff on Utica Masjid. You know exactly what I'm about. Is that I am completely against not just the LGBTQ agenda and the so-called rights that they have tried to allocate to themselves, but I'm against secularism. That's what I'm constantly talking about. I'm against all of the, I'm against feminism. I'm against all of the modern ideologies that are assaulting us as Muslims and our youth, and are colonizing us from the inside, and are basically making us reshape Islam into something that's not Islam. Anybody who knows since I started, that's my project. And that's actually my mission with Yaqeen Institute, is that, some people imagine that I just kind of sold my soul to the devil, or something like that. I have principles, right? And I have things, a mission in life. And I believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put me here for a very specific reason, because not many people have the training that I have when it comes to being familiar with these ideologies in an academic way. I studied feminism. I studied post-colonialism. I studied Foucault. I studied postmodernism. I studied Marxism. I studied all these sorts of things. I studied in university. And then Allah guided me to Islam. And so I have the mission in life to be able to, I think my duty is to clarify and deconstruct and show why Islam is superior to all of these things, and to warn people against the dangers of these things. And so my mission and my sort of mandate for joining Yaqeen, what they reached out to me, they wanted me to do this work for Yaqeen Institute with the Yaqeen platform. I have never once been told you shouldn't say that, or make sure you say this, or don't whatever. No, and everybody knows I'm all about, I will go where I have to go to speak my mind. I've never been, a person that's going to mince my words or going to just paint a pretty picture. If I believe that something is true, I'm going to say it. I'm not going to be belligerent. I'm not going to be insulting. I will be tactful and strategic, but I'm also not going to hide. And so when it comes to the things that are happening now in the United States of America with the LGBTQ lobby, it's an abomination. It needs to be rolled back. We should do everything in our power, legally, politically, culturally, to push back against this phenomenon. We need to make sure the Equality Act never passes. We need to re-corral all this sort of sexualized education back into one subject, and then make sure that parents have the chance to opt out. We need to get all of this sort of indoctrination entirely out of schools. We need to make sure, even, let's talk about, reversing the quote unquote right for gay marriage. Yeah, let's do it. Let's talk about how to do it. There's a whole laundry list of things that have to be done. And some people are nitpicking and they're saying, okay, show me what you've done. Let's get into the details of the thing. If people have taken a first step, and a lot of people, they misunderstood the Navigating Differences document. They think that that's just the end all be all. That's just the first step. I compare it to like a bleeding wound. If somebody has a gaping wound in their chest and they're pouring out blood, that first blood clot comes along and stops the bleeding. You don't say, well, why isn't he up and walking? That's just the first blood clot, right? It's like we have so much that we have to do. And we have to be careful, because our enemies are going to try to divide us. Our enemies are going to try to find the differences that we have in between our community. You don't think they know? You don't think they know the differences between this sect and who's beefing with who? They know all of that. They study that. There's people who are paid to pay attention to that stuff. If we're not careful, right, we're going to become pawns, and we're going to be turned against one another instead of uniting upon this one issue to try to push back and try to save this thing, right? So I hope everybody doesn't lose the forest through the trees, and I hope that people can see the big picture. And again, if anybody doubts, my credentials on this issue, I encourage them to go through the Utica Masjid YouTube channel, see all the work that I've done. It's consistent. It's never been, I'm a latecomer. I don't try to cast stones at people, because I graduated in 2020 and I came back. And so I'm relatively new to the Dawah scene. I don't have a record of supporting anything back in 2016 or 2015 or 2014 or whatever. I'm relatively new. But in the short time that I've been doing this, I've been very, very consistent. I don't have anything where I've never, ever said that our rights are dependent upon recognizing somebody else's rights or something like that. I have a degree in political science, and I know that that's full of baloney. That is not how politics works. And I've been vocal both in private and in public with people who have much larger platforms than I do, that do not understand politics as well as I do, trying to help them understand that that is something that is used against us. That's not true. That's not how rights work. That's not how we maneuver as a community, and that we can talk about it. There's a strategy and there's a way, right, to try to politic. And, there's certain things that, to angle, to create a space for ourselves, et cetera, et cetera. But it is not contingent upon swallowing somebody else's ideology or recognizing somebody else's so-called rights that contradict our faith, or imagining that, they're going to do some sort of favor for us down the line. Nope. that's not going to work. And I think people have finally learned that lesson, alhamdulillah. Maybe it took a little bit longer than we would have liked, but I think a lot of people who fell prey to that sort of, political calculus have woken up and smelled the coffee, so to speak. So I encourage everybody to keep their eyes on the prize and don't get distracted. And if there's a reason and a means to unite, this is the time to unite. We don't unite upon falsehood. Everybody knows that. But if there ever was a time to unite, this is it.
MashaAllah. That's awesome. And I think just one more word of advice that I would like, I guess, you to let them know is that whenever someone has a doubt about something, as Muslims, we shouldn't, because you quoted from Surah Hujurat, right?
Yes.
And I want to go back to it again. Whenever there might be something that is confusing, someone might not read properly, because I think things were read out of context by large groups of people. Unfortunately, some are immediately jumping 100% into, therefore you must be doing this. Therefore you must be watering it down. Therefore you must be, like you said, accepting that you're going to have to take a favor in the future because you're going to do this and say this, right? They're starting off with Muslim brothers who have good track records of doing good, and then just immediately running to what is this called in Islam? It's called
Su'adhan. I'm talking about, a suspicion or.
So what's your advice to people when they come out hearing something? If you hear something, what do we do as Muslims? If you hear
clarify,
something,
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says tabayyanu, right? If somebody comes to you and, it's a general thing, and you have to prove your sincerity. Okay. Again, that's what it comes back to. If you're sincere, you clarify. You don't just start shooting from the hip. No matter how much pride you have for this deen or how much ghira you have for it, you have as much ghira as I do. Maybe I have more than you do, right? Don't think that you being reckless and careless means that you have more ghira for this deen than I do, right? Part of your ghira for the deen is making sure that you don't fall into sin, because the shaitan doesn't care. The devil doesn't care which side he pulls you on. He's going to pull you off on either side that he can, okay? Whether it comes from extreme to this way or extreme to that way. So clarify, verify. That's the way of the truth. That's what's maturity. And that's the way that's better for the dunya and the afterlife.
MashaAllah. This has been an amazing episode. I really appreciate that. You remind me of a lot of things myself. فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَ تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, right? For verily, the reminder benefits the believers. And I've been honored to have you here. I'm sorry we kept you a few minutes over the time that you needed to go. But I really think the people are going to benefit from this, inshallah ta'ala. And hopefully we can see you on again sometime soon. I mean, inshallah, we've got a lot of days ahead of us, a lot of work to do. And I ask Allah for the best for Utica Masjid, for Yaqeen, and for everybody else who is trying to disseminate Islam to the masses, right? Because in my personal opinion, I feel like we're on the cusp, right, of a lot of people waking up.
Inshallah.
I'm seeing it myself, right?
Yep.
With the people that message me. And if people would just be patient, let us do our thing, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't have bad assumptions of your brothers.
Yep.
And unite upon goodness, tawheed, and the right things, obviously not upon falsehood, but put some of the other smaller differences aside, and let's work together for spreading this deen and saving these people from the hellfire. Because that's the whole purpose of all of this, is to help people gain the light that Allah so graciously gave us.
Ameen. Beautiful. All right, Brandon. I appreciate it. Barakallah feek.
Take care.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I really appreciate y'all sticking around. This has been a great program. Again, that was Imam Tom Faccine at Utica Masjid, former graduate of the Islamic University of Medina. If you haven't yet, go check out their YouTube. Go watch the videos. Look at all of the stuff that he has put forth before, his credentials, and you'll find that this is somebody who has a lot of ghira for the deen, a lot of jealousy, love, and desire to help push orthodox traditional Islam. Guys, if you haven't yet, go check out my other videos here, and I've got a playlist right here that I really think you'll benefit from. Those of you who have helped support this project, I really appreciate you. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward you in the greatest, and may we meet in the hereafter. And anyone else who wants to support the project, you can go check out the Patreon if you think that it's something worthwhile. We also have a lot of merchandise. Muslim Cowboy clothing brand is out there, so jazakumullah khair. Guys, don't forget to lasso that like, saddle up on the subscribe, and until next time, salam y'all.
والقرآن المجيد بل عجبوا أن جاءهم منذر منهم فقال الكافرون هذا شيء عجيب.